Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Senior Safety Advice Podcast, the show that helps older adults and family caregivers make smart safety choices so that you can live well, stay independent, and feel confident right at home. I'm Esther Kane. I'm a retired occupational therapist, certified aging in place specialist, and a dementia care specialist. So glad that you're here with me today. Okay, before we dive in, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app or your YouTube channel, wherever it is that you're listening to us from, because every subscription, every review helps us to promote the podcast to others. Of course, share this episode with someone you care about and visit seniorsafetyadvice.com anytime for free resources and tips that you can use right away. Now, today's episode is a little different than what we've been doing. We tend to do a lot of practical how to content on this show, and we'll be back to that very soon, of course. But today, I want to talk about what researchers are finding right now about heat and older adults, because the science has been moving very quickly, and some of what's coming out is a little eye opening. Okay, this isn't a scare episode, I promise. What I want to do is to share what's being learned and translate all of that into plain language and then connect it to things that you can actually do. Because information without action isn't much help to anyone, right? All right, so let's get into it. Let's start with a picture of where things stand because the numbers have been climbing and they tell a very important story. Extreme heat is now the deadliest weather related hazard in the United States. Can you believe that? Not hurricanes, not tornadoes, heat. And the number of heat related deaths recorded by multiple reputable sources has been rising sharply from around 1,100 to 1,600 deaths back in 2020 to more than 2,325 in 2023. Now, that's more than double in just 3 years. And here's the part that matters most for our listeners. Over 80% of the people who die from heat related causes each year in the United States are over the age of 60. Over 80%. It's not a general population problem. This is disproportionately a problem for older adults. The United Nations Environment Program put out a report back in 2025 that found heat related deaths among older adults have risen by an estimated 85% since the 1990s. Yep, 85%. That is not a slow trend, it's an acceleration. And the average number of heat waves that major U.S. cities experience each year has doubled since the 1980s. That's according to the federal government's fifth National Climate Assessment. Now, I'm sharing these numbers not to create alarm, but because understanding the scope of the problem is the first step toward taking it seriously. And the good news, which we'll get into, is that most heat related illness and death in older adults is actually preventable. That's what makes this worth talking about. You know, in my years as an occupational therapist, I saw heat affect older adults in ways that were subtle before they became serious. I worked in South Florida for many years, and if you live down there, you know that 9 out of 12 months, it's hot. So I remember a client who seemed a little more confused than usual, someone who was unusually fatigued or had a headache they couldn't shake. Heat doesn't always announce itself dramatically. That's part of what makes it dangerous. It's subtle. And it's part of why education about this topic matters so much. So, let me tell you about something that came out of Harvard research that I think is really important for people to understand. For a long time, the standard definition of a dangerous heat wave was, quote, a period of abnormally hot weather lasting more than 2 days. Now, what would happen is that local weather offices would then determine what temperature in their region is considered abnormally hot. For example, in New York, they consider 2 or more days of 90 degrees or more to be a heat wave. But in hotter climates like Phoenix, Las Vegas, much of Florida, a week in the mid 90s may not be labeled a heat wave because those temperatures are basically normal. Advisories trigger at higher heat index levels, but it's all regional. Researchers at Harvard's Chan School of Public Health have been finding that the danger actually starts earlier than these definitions for older adults. Harvard environmental health researcher John Spengler put it very plainly. He said, "We're seeing problems with hydration, sleep, and cognitive decline at 85 degrees and lower." 85 degrees. I mean, that's a temperature that might feel like a normal summer day to a lot of people. I mean, it's not going to make the evening news usually. So that's a dangerous new piece of research that shows us that the sensitivity that seniors have to heat is more than what we originally thought. So here's another piece of that. It's not just about the peak temperature. It's about whether temperatures cool down at night. Heat waves are especially dangerous when nighttime temperatures stay high because the body doesn't get a chance to reset. Your core temperature never fully comes back down. That accumulating heat burden is what tips people into real danger. What this means practically is that we can't just watch the heat index on the hottest days and think we're covered. We need to be paying attention to overall warm weather patterns and building protective habits that run all summer long or all season long as the heat is around, not just during official heat emergencies. I remember walking down, and I can't remember the name of the street in Fort Lauderdale is very popular. There were a lot of restaurants and shops there, and it was midnight, and I was wearing very light clothing, and I was sweating. Everyone around me was sweating because the temperature was still well over 90 and the humidity was very high. It does not always cool down at night. All right, so now here's something that surprises a lot of people. When we think about heat danger, we often picture being out in the sun, at a picnic or in a parking lot, working in the yard, at the beach. And yeah, I mean, of course, that can absolutely be dangerous. But most heat related deaths in older adults actually happen indoors, at home, in the very place where you're supposed to be safe. During the 2021 heat dome over British Columbia, if you remember that, 90% of the deaths happened indoors. And data from New York City heat mortality reports shows a similar picture. The majority of heat deaths occur at home. Now, there's an especially sobering detail from Arizona. In Maricopa County, a 2023 heat report table shows that among indoor heat associated deaths, 95% occurred in homes where an air conditioning unit was present. Of those deaths in homes with those AC units, about 85% involved units that were not functioning. And additional cases involved units that had no electricity or simply were not in use. In other words, the homeowners did not turn them on. Either they were broken, there was no electricity, or they simply did not turn them on. That tells us something really important. Having air conditioning is not the same thing as using it effectively. Some older adults avoid running the AC because they're worried about the electric bill. Who isn't, right? Some grew up in a time when you just opened the windows and toughed it out. And some have units that they don't even know how to operate or that haven't been serviced in years and aren't working effectively. Now, this is an area where family caregivers can make a real difference. I don't mean by lecturing, but by checking in, by sitting in the house on a hot day and feeling whether it's actually cool by looking at the thermostat, by asking if the bill has been a concern. Because the other side of the coin also is that many older adults will turn on the AC, but they turn it on at a high temperature, at 85 degrees or 88 degrees. My mom-in-law used to keep the AC on at 88 degrees. It's very hot for too hot. So you want to look at that. Here's the research finding that I find most important that I want to share with you. And it's the one that's generated the most new research in the last couple of years. Scientists are finding increasingly strong connections between heat exposure and cognitive decline in older adults. I want you to think about that and how important this issue of being exposed to heat is. A big research project published in 2024 looked at how hot weather affects the brain and mental health of older adults. Scientists checked almost 17,000 papers and ended up using 76 high quality, reputable studies from those papers in their report. They found that most of the dementia and Alzheimer's studies showed more problems when the weather was very hot or during heat waves. Now, heat isn't just uncomfortable for aging brains. It appears to be an actual genuine risk factor. Hot days and heat waves seem to correlate with things like increased confusion, more visits to the ER, faster cognitive decline, or worse symptom flare ups in people who already have dementia or Alzheimer's. A new study in Alzheimer's and Dementia, the Journal of the Alzheimer's Association, followed more than 57,000 adults in Japan who were 65 and older and did not have dementia when the study began. The researchers found that the more years people spent living through extremely hot days, the more likely they were to develop dementia. This suggests that heat risk isn't just about one very hot summer. Repeated exposure to extreme heat over time may raise the chance of dementia. A large U.S. study of more than 3 million older Medicare beneficiaries found that days of extreme heat were linked to higher rates of hospitalization with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, even after accounting for age, race, and other factors. Now, let me be clear about what this research does and does not say. It shows an association between heat and cognitive decline. It doesn't prove that heat causes dementia. That research is still developing. But the signal is consistent enough across enough studies that researchers are beginning to pay very close attention, and so should we. What I personally find compelling about this heat cognition research is that it connects two things that I observed clinically, but didn't really have the science to fully explain. Clients with early cognitive changes often became noticeably more confused and disoriented during hot weather. I would see them in rehab or in their homes, or family members would call and say, my mom has been very different this week. I don't know, more agitated, not making sense. And it often corresponded with a stretch of hot days. I mean, we used to call it, well, it's a bad spell. She's, going through something. It's just temporary. But the research now suggests that it may be something more specific than that. I wish I had this research back then. So, why is all this happening to older adults? Well, older adults regulate body temperature less efficiently as they age. Many common medications, such as blood pressure medications, antidepressants, diuretics, interfere with the body's ability to cool itself or dehydrate itself. Dementia itself can blunt the brain's ability to even recognize that I'm too hot or I need water. So the person may not self correct the way a younger, cognitively healthy adult would. Heat stress increases inflammation and cardiovascular strain, both of which are already linked to cognitive decline. Now, let's talk about who the research identifies as most vulnerable to heat because it's not the same for every older adult. I mean, just because you're 65 doesn't mean it's going to affect all of you. All right. People with chronic health problems carry much higher risk in extreme heat. Research shows that during heat waves, hospitalizations in older adults rise for conditions like fluid and electrolyte disorders, kidney and other urologic problems, and cardiovascular disease. In New York City, the heat mortality reports show that most people who die in hot weather already have at least one serious chronic illness. Often it's heart disease or high blood pressure. Now, many common drugs, including diuretics, blood pressure medications, antihistamines, antidepressants, and some antipsychotics, affect how the body regulates temperature or how much fluid it retains. Some suppress sweating, some affect how blood circulates. Older adults on multiple medications may have compounded risks they're not even aware of. Now, another issue is isolation is its own risk factor. Older adults who live alone, who have limited social networks, or who are homebound may go hours or days without anyone checking in on them during a heat event. The people who died in the British Columbia heat dome were overwhelmingly living alone. And economic factors matter as well. Poorer neighborhoods tend to have less tree cover, more heat absorbing pavement, and fewer green spaces. They reach higher temperatures and cool down more slowly. So older adults in those areas face the same heat on top of greater barriers to air conditioning. So please, if you or a loved one take multiple medications, it's worth asking the prescribing physician or pharmacist specifically. The question is, are any of these meds something I should know about in this heat? It's a question that most providers will appreciate, and the answer could genuinely affect your summer safety plan. Okay, so we've covered the scope, the locations, the cognitive risks, and the vulnerable populations. Now, let's talk about what the evidence says actually helps, because this is the part, honestly, that matters the most. Air conditioning remains the single most effective intervention for preventing heat illness and death in older adults, period. If there's one message to take from all of this research, it's that cool indoor environments can save lives. And making sure that older adults have access to them and are actually using them properly is the highest impact thing that we can do. Now, hydration is consistently highlighted across the research with one important nuance. Older adults have a reduced sense of thirst. The body's thirst signal weakens with age, which means that by the time you feel thirsty, you may already be mildly dehydrated. Research supports drinking fluids regularly throughout the day during warm weather, even before thirst sets in. Now, social connection is protective. Studies consistently show that older adults who have regular check ins from family, neighbors, faith communities, or other community programs fare much better during heat events, during most any event, honestly. The check in call from an adult child, the neighbor who knows to knock if the shades aren't up by a certain time, the faith community that reaches out during heat advisories. These informal networks are genuinely life saving. Now, cooling centers are available, hopefully near you. They work when people use them. Research shows that awareness of and access to cooling centers is a protective factor. The challenge is that many older adults particularly those who are isolated or who have mobility limitations, who face barriers to get to those cooling centers, though that is what is the challenge. Transportation, familiarity, and stigma all play a role. Communities and families can help by identifying cooling options in advance and making a plan before a heat emergency happens. That's the important part, before the emergency happens. Early morning activity is also consistently recommended for older adults who want to stay physically active in the summer. The research supports that doing outdoor activity before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m., depending if the heat has gone down where you live, when possible, with rest and cool environments in between. In other words, you may have to cut down your 4-mile walk that you normally do and just do less in the summer, or get yourself a treadmill. I want to take a few minutes here to speak specifically to those of you who are caring for a loved one with dementia, because heat poses a particular challenge in that situation, as we've already learned. Someone living with dementia may not be able to accurately sense or communicate how they're feeling. They may not recognize that they're hot. They may resist removing extra layers of clothing. They may refuse to drink. They may be unaware that they haven't had water in hours. The behavioral signs of heat illness are confusion, agitation, unusual sleepiness. All of that can look almost exactly like a bad dementia day. And that overlap is dangerous because it can cause caregivers to miss what's actually happening. So during hot weather, people with dementia need more frequent proactive check ins, not a, are you okay? But actually feeling their skin. Is it hot and dry? Actually checking the room temperature, actively offering small amounts of fluid, jello, watermelon, cucumbers. There are these drops that are very hydrating and very good for people with dementia every hour or so. All of that, anything to bring hydration into the body. Watching for changes in confusion or agitation that seem out of the ordinary, even for them. And given the emerging research connecting repeated heat exposure with dementia progression, keeping a loved one with dementia in a cool environment during heat events isn't just about today's comfort. It may matter for their long term cognitive health. All right, now, caregivers, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. You are already carrying a heavy load. Don't I know it? And episodes like this one, with all of this information about risk and statistics, can feel like more weight added to something that's already heavy. So let me say this gently. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You don't have to have a perfect heat safety plan in place tomorrow. What you can do is pick one or two things from today's episode and start there. Maybe it's calling your parent this week and asking about their air conditioning, not to interrogate, just to check in. Maybe it's asking their doctor about medications and heat at the next appointment. Maybe it's identifying a neighbor or community member who can be a second set of eyes during hot spells. Small, consistent actions are what protect people over the summer. You don't need a grand intervention. You need regular presence and a few key things in place. That's something that you can do, and it matters more than you know. Okay, so let's wrap up. Here is what the current research is telling us about heat and older adults this summer. Heat is now the deadliest weather hazard in the United States, and older adults carry a disproportionate share of that risk, a pattern that research is also seeing in other countries as the planet continues to warm. The danger often starts at lower temperatures than people expect and gets worse when nights stay hot, so the body never gets to cool down. In many deadly heat events, most deaths have occurred indoors at home, often in places with air conditioners that either weren't working, weren't turned on, or just weren't turned on low enough. And a growing body of studies from the US, Japan, China, and other countries links repeated exposure to extreme heat with faster cognitive decline, higher dementia related mortality, and increased dementia onset. The protective factors are clear: cool indoor environments, consistent hydration before thirst kicks in, regular social check ins, and awareness of how medications affect heat tolerance. These things work, and they're all within reach. The science is telling us to take summer heat seriously, not with fear, but with intention. And now you have what you need to do exactly. All right. I want to thank you so much for being here today. This kind of episode takes a little more research than our usual content, and I appreciate you staying with me through it. I hope it gave you something real to work with as you head into the heat of summer. For more free resources on staying safe and well at home, including tips on heat, hydration, and summer safety, visit us at seniorsafetyadvice.com. And if you're looking for certified aging in place specialists or other senior care services in your area, check out aginginplacedirectory.com. It's a wonderful place to start. If this podcast has helped you in any way, one of the biggest ways that you can support it is by subscribing, leaving a review, liking the episode. Those simple actions may seem small, they only take a few seconds, but they really do make a huge difference. They help the podcast reach more people, especially family caregivers, older adults, and professionals who may need this information and support right now. And honestly, your support helps me to continue creating these episodes each week. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for helping me spread this message to others who may benefit from it. I'm Esther Kane. Stay safe, stay cool, and I'll see you in the next episode.